At Arizona State University, we've made online education better, smarter, and more personalized so you can go further in your aspiring field.
I decided to pursue medicine once I realized that ASU did have the online program for biological sciences. You're still required to learn the same curriculum. You're still being tested on the same content that anyone would be tested on in person. The comprehensiveness of the program prepared me so well for medical school.
Explore over 350 plus programs at asuonline.asu.edu. With so many options, why choose Arizona State University?
For me, the only online option was ASU because of the quality. Their faculty was really involved with their students and care about your personal journey. The dedication to my personal development from my professors, that's been extremely valuable to me.
Earn your degree from the nation's most innovative university. Online. That's a degree better. Explore more than 350 plus undergraduate, graduate, and certificate programs at asuonline.asu.edu.
It's the Opperman Report. Join digital forensic investigator and PI Ed Opperman for an in-depth discussion of conspiracy theories, strategy of New World Order resistance, high-profile court cases in the news, and interviews with expert guests and authors on these topics and more. It's the Opperman Report. And now, here is investigator Ed Opperman.
Okay, welcome to the Opperman Report. I'm your host, Private Investigator Ed Opperman, and this show is brought to you by emailrevealer.com. You go to emailrevealer.com and you can get a copy of my book. You get an autographed copy of the book called How to Become a Successful Private Investigator. Also at emailrevealer.com, you could, let's say you think your husband or your wife is cheating on you. You can give us their email address. We'll trace it back to any online dating websites, porn sites, escort service sites, all kinds of stuff like that. We catch them cheating online. Also locates, background reports, asset searches, any kind of PI services you might need. Emailrevealer.com. Also, to check out OppermanReport.com. That's our radio show website, and we have a special member section there where you can find exclusive shows that we record during the week. You won't find them live on Friday night. You won't find them live on Saturday night. These are extra shows we give you. You can sign up, become a member. And also, too, there's all kinds of nifty stuff in there, too. We have a documents section where we have all the Trump lawsuits. Many, well, not all the Trump lawsuits, but we got a great many of the Trump lawsuits. We have the one with this 13-year-old rape. We have the one Trump University, all that stuff. We have videos of the search warrant on Jeffrey Epstein's house. We have the D.C. Madam's phone records. We got that in there. All kinds of nifty stuff in there you can look up. In fact, I'm about to put in there a whole bunch of documents and pictures and stuff from the Son of Sam investigation back in the 70s in New York City. Today we have a returning guest. We have Jim Hunt. I'm really excited to have Jim Hunt back. He's the nephew of Frank Sturgis, but he's also a law professor and an attorney. And he wrote this book called Warrior, Frank Sturgis, the CIA's #1 assassin spy who nearly killed Castro but was ambushed by Watergate. So, Jim Hunt, are you there?
I'm here, Ed, and thank you again for having me back. So it's good to be back here. Thank you.
Thank you. Very popular show. Everybody really enjoyed the show. A couple of complaints about me. I didn't answer the right questions, but everybody liked you. I know, right?
Yeah, you're right.
But okay. I had a lot of fun with that show. Now, tell us a little bit about yourself. Remind us. Jim Hunt, law professor, attorney, right?
Correct. I'm a professor at the University of Cincinnati College of Law. I'm the co-director of what's called the Weaver Institute of Law and Psychiatry at the law school. It's we promote educational opportunities for students and things involving both law and mental health. And I have a practice. I'm primarily focusing on criminal defense work right now. But that's it. And then, of course, I wrote the book. So.
And it's just the one book, Warrior, Frank Sturgis, the CIA's #1 assassin spy who nearly killed Castro but was ambushed by Watergate. That's the only book you've written, right?
That's the only book I've written, Ed. There's some other ones that are kind of cooking around right now, but there's nothing else that is imminent, let me put it that way. So.
Gotcha. Now, to clear up some stuff from the last interview, a lot of people were complaining Okay.
Okay.
The title of the show was CIA's #1 assassin spy, but we never got into some of the assassinations that your uncle there, Frank Sturgis, the Watergate burglar and CIA agent, some of the assassinations he was involved in. What can you tell us about?
Well, the primary, Frank was not always successful in his attempts at assassination. Let me put it that way.
Okay.
He certainly was with regard to Trujillo in the Dominican Republic. Frank was intimately involved in that one. He basically supplied the arms and the ammunitions and some of the directions in terms of how the plot was to be carried out. He had numerous plots to kill Fidel Castro. One included sending a lady named Marita Lorenz, who had been a lover of Fidel's, to see Fidel with poison pills. That never worked. When he was in Cuba with Fidel, he had a couple of opportunities to assassinate Fidel, Raul, and Che Guevara, but never got the go-ahead from the CIA. The other assassination that possibly involves Frank is in Portugal. There is now a claim in Portugal that he may have been involved in the deaths of their prime minister and defense minister and secretary of the cabinet in the crash of a small plane back in 1980. So those are some of the assassination plots that he was involved in. He also they took a swipe at Duvalier. It didn't really. So they really wanted to scare him more than anything else. They basically dropped some bombs on the presidential palace, and I think that was a dispute with the Duvalier had that was actually with the mafia, I believe, over some of the casinos in Haiti. So I hope that clears it up.
They're never happy. They're never satisfied. But let me ask a question. Now, he dropped bombs on Duvalier's palace, I guess. Now, how did he do that? He just rented a plane and just started throwing bombs out the window?
Well, he had one of the items that Frank took with him in June of 1959 from Cuba when he left was a B-25 airplane. He had purchased that airplane for Fidel in the previous year, and then when he left Cuba and went to Miami and set up his base of operations in Miami, he took the plane with him. They also had a C-46 that another guy flew out for him at the time. So he had his own airplane.
Okay, wait. So Frank Sturgis, and I don't think this has ever been discussed before anywhere. Frank Sturgis had his own B-25 bomber that he just had in a hangar down there in Miami, and no one asked him, "Hey man, what are you doing with your own bomber?"
Well, there were some federal investigations that looked at it from. I tell you, the plane was at Opelika Airport, which was just around the corner from where Frank lived on Northwest 122nd Street. I remember seeing the plane. It was, he had purchased it. He and Pedro Diaz-Lanz, who was the head of the Cuban Air Force, had purchased the plane in San Francisco in the year before the revolution was successful. And I forget exactly where they got the C-46, but that came along as well. So Frank actually purchased that plane with Fidel's money and then flew it. They flew it from San Francisco. They got waylaid in Mexico, actually, on the trip, and spent about a week in jail. But then they got out and then successfully brought the plane to the Air Force base right outside of Havana, where they kept it. So that was his plane. He used that plane to drop leaflets on Havana in October of 1959, which was one of the first kind of assaults, if you will, that Frank made against Fidel.
Now, when you say he dropped the bomb, did he drop like a homemade bomb, or did he somehow have access to a military-grade bomb?
He was able to fabricate it. I saw him do it. They made these bombs really with bomb casings, Ed, and then they would be filled sometimes with napalm and explosives, sometimes just with explosive, and then maybe a can of ballast or something, and then a detonator. And indeed, they would be, thrown out of the airplane or dropped from the airplane. Sure, yeah.
So he could build his own bombs using, Army surplus casings?
Exactly. If you are Army or Navy, if your audience is familiar with any of those stores, they used to be able to buy these things. They look kind of like torpedoes.
Right.
And they would accommodate, if you can imagine, if you had a gallon paint can, they would accommodate 3 of those paint cans. And as I said, one would be filled with explosives, one with ballast, maybe one with napalm. They fabricated a number of them that tried to drop on the sugar fields in Cuba to disrupt the economy down there, to burn down some of the sugar. So I saw them make them because I actually helped them make those kind of bombs.
Right. You described that in the last interview. I don't know if it was off the air or on the air, but you said something. You were sitting around the kitchen table, I believe, making napalm bombs, or was that Molotov cocktails? What was that you were doing?
No, well, they were napalm bombs. They were made actually. It was at a garage in Southwest Miami, and I believe it was owned by Virgilio Gonzalez. It was later one of the Watergate burglars. But there was a whole crew of people, and they were putting these bombs together. They'd cut the casing open so you could slide these cans in, and the detonators, and there we were. Anyway.
Yeah. Anyway, let's move on. Now, let me ask a couple of questions about this. Now, when Jim Hunt, how old were you when you were there doing this and saw this?
When I was doing that, I was about 16 years old, Ed.
Okay, so listen, I got stories when I was 16 too. But now listen,
yeah.
when you go down there and you're in this garage, and everybody's are they paying you to be there, or are you just doing this for fun? No, I remember now. Frank had a group called the International Anti-Communist Brigade. Right. And
I was a charter member of it. And so, I think some of these people were part of the brigade that were working there. They were all Cubans. So no, I wasn't getting paid. I was just kind of along for the ride, for the adventure.
Okay. I hear you, man. I hear you.
Yeah.
Now this thing in Portugal, because I know you just went down there with A.J. Weberman to testify before the Portuguese Parliament, correct?
Correct.
Okay.
Yes.
Now that was in 1980.
Correct. That was after Watergate.
Right. So then Frank was still he was undaunted. He was still running around doing whatever he wanted.
Well, if you talk to Frank after Watergate, he would tell you that he was going to be a good boy and he wasn't going to go out and do things that were a little dangerous. But, I don't know whether that's exactly true. He was in Portugal beginning in about 1977 off and on. He was trying to help the anti-communist rebels who were fighting the Angolan communist government. Angola, of course, was a former colony of Portugal. And so that put him into contact with a lot of the anti-communist Angolans, and one of those was a guy named Fernando Simoes, who I actually interviewed again this past year. And Simoes is the person who, about 3 years ago, issued a confession in which he claims that Frank and Oliver North gave him and another guy some money to come up with a bomb to blow up this airplane where the Portuguese prime minister was a passenger. It was actually the start of Iran-Contra. There were arms being traded through Lisbon to Iran, which was fighting Iraq at the time. And the Portuguese prime minister was trying to put a stop to it, and the United States didn't want that to happen. I think there's very good proof in that guy. We may never know. I mean, the CIA refuses to give us any information about it. But Frank Carlucci was the prime minister. I'm sorry, strike that. He was the ambassador, the U.S. ambassador to Portugal for a number of years. He was there when all this was going on. He later became a deputy director of the CIA. And Simoes, in his confession and so in some of his interviews, indicates that it was the word for this thing really came from Carlucci. I think Frank's role was more of an operational mode. You know what I mean? Rather than the originator of it. But
has it ever been reported anywhere else before that Ollie North was involved in the assassination of this Portuguese prime minister?
Only in the annals of the Portuguese Parliamentary Commission that has taken testimony about this, and in the confession of the Simoes. He's the one that claims that Oliver North was there. I don't know. He's still alive, but nobody that I know is going after him.
Who's that? Ollie North? You mean Ollie North or
Ollie North?
Yeah.
Ollie North.
He's still well and alive. He's on Fox News.
Right. Well, Frank Carlucci is still alive too.
Oh, right.
I mean, I tell you, the CIA fought us very hard, Weberman and I, very hard to not disclose this information, because they basically were saying it would disrupt relations between the United States and other countries, and now I can see why. I mean, because I believe, probably we may have been involved in it.
Right. Oh, no, so you're convinced, though, that your uncle was involved in it, right?
Well, I'm certainly convinced that he could have been. Let me put it that way. We've searched for proof to show that he was in Portugal at the exact time, and Samoa said that they had this meeting. I've never been able to come up with that, but just, I think Samoa is telling the truth. I do.
Okay.
Yes.
And now, you said when you were growing up, you're 16 years old, you were an anti-communist rabidly, I guess. You're making bombs. But now you're teamed up with A.J. Weberman, who's by no means anti-communist. How do you justify? Where do you land now in as far as your political ideology?
Well, A.J. in some ways is my worst enemy. He believes that Frank shot President Kennedy, which I totally disagree with him on that, because I was with Frank when Kennedy was shot. But, on some of the other things, A.J. is a very tenacious researcher, and when this issue came up in Cuba, in Portugal, I said, well, who better than to talk to about helping with the research than A.J., who, if there's some way he could nail my uncle, he would.
Right.
And so that's the reason we kind of teamed up on this thing. He's in the middle of making a documentary about it right now. I don't know where that's going. But somewhere in the documents in the CIA, I'm telling you, Ed, there was information about this, and I think there certainly was potentially involvement by the CIA.
But now, where do you land, though, politically? Are you still an anti-communist, or are you kind of eased up on that? More of a Republican now, maybe, or a liberal?
Me?
Yeah.
I'm pretty much an independent, to be honest with you. I was raised within the pretty much the Democratic Party. My parents were both Democrats. But in terms of voting, I've tried to be pretty much of an independent. I just wish we had somebody that we had a good choice to vote for nowadays. But that's a whole other issue, So, but at the time, this anti-communist thing. I was a member. We didn't have meetings. You know what I mean?
Right.
Frank was in Miami. I lived in Cincinnati, but I thought it was kind of neat. Then in high school, they have that card. So.
I tell you, I love this stuff. Let me ask you a question now. AJ is pretty convinced now that he has, in his book, Decoding the Oswald Code, that book there, that he has pictures of Frank in Oswald's undeveloped film. What do you make, and decoding all the code, what do you make of that? Do you endorse that, or you?
I don't endorse everything that AJ says in that book. I haven't read the whole thing thoroughly through, but I do think that Frank knew Oswald. I don't have any doubt about that. I think that there was some encounter probably that summer before Kennedy was shot in Miami. After the assassination, there was an article in the Fort Lauderdale newspaper that quoted Frank as saying that he had run into Oswald at a demonstration down at Bayfront Park earlier that year, or the previous year, whenever it was. And for some reason, that story disappeared, and Frank later denied it and wouldn't, and nobody ever followed up on it. But no, I think Frank knew Oswald. I think they had some contact.
Did you ever talk to him about it?
Well, but he would always deny it to me. The thing is, my point about Frank and the assassination is he was not in Dallas that day.
Right.
Okay? I know that because I was in Miami with him that day.
Right.
And but as far as being a part of it, I think he was. For goodness sakes, his name was in Oswald's address book. So that's one of the things that kind of convinced me.
Under the name Frank Fiorini. Under the name Frank Fiorini, correct?
Under Fiorini, correct.
Right.
Yeah, exactly. So,
and people should know that you're the alibi. You're Frank Sturgis's alibi, or the only alibi, correct? You're the only one that was there saw him that day.
Well, my grandmother was there, but she's now deceased.
Right.
But my Aunt Janet is still alive, and she recalls that he was in Miami the whole day at home, and I remember seeing him in the morning, and I remember seeing him in the afternoon.
Right.
Where he was in between, I don't know. But I don't think he had enough time to go to Dallas and shoot Kennedy and then come back to Miami and sit down and have dinner. It didn't happen.
Even if he hopped on his B-25 bomber and flew over there and flew back, he couldn't do it.
Yeah. Well, I calculated some of that in my book, and even with a small jet, a private jet, it would have been very, very, very tight.
Right.
For him to have made that trip and actually do that. But that's true. The airport was just around the corner.
So he would have had to skip lunch and everything, right? There's no way he would have. Okay. Now, very fascinating. Now, last time you mentioned that, this is the first time I heard you mention the name Ollie North was involved in his Portugal business, right? But now, last time you said something about that Frank was involved with. Now, did you say Iran-Contra or the October surprise? Clarify that for me.
Well, it's really what I meant to say, or at least tried to say, was what Frank supposedly was doing in Portugal with Oliver North was the beginning of Iran-Contra, which turned into Iran-Contra because it was basically making sure that the guns got to the Iranians and the arms and the money got back out to the Contras. So it was the beginning of that. And, could it have been part of the October surprise? Well, yeah. I mean, there's, I think, some good evidence that some of the Reagan people, Reagan was running against Carter at the time in 1980, actually did have meetings with the Iranians that summer, and promises were made that they would try to continue the flow of arms as long as the Iranians held on to the hostages until after the election. And when you look at the circumstantial evidence, I mean, what happened? Reagan gets sworn in, and 20 minutes later, they free the hostages. So there was some kind of deal somewhere along the way, I believe, yeah.
There's even some speculation that Ollie North was involved in sabotaging that rescue mission that Carter, when they lost those helicopters in the desert, I forget the name of the operation. Have you ever heard anything about that?
I've only heard that, Ed. I don't know anything about it, but I have heard it, and I at this point I can't remember from where, but I have heard that assertion made, sure. Yeah.
Makes you think, right?
Sure. Yeah.
Now, do you think Frank was involved in running guns down to Nicaragua to the Contras?
Well, here's the thing. Frank had a great knowledge. I mean, if you wanted to buy guns and you wanted to buy them in quantities, Frank is somebody you would talk to. He would know where to go to get them, okay? So he could be an advisor in that capacity. I mean, he didn't actually, I'm not sure that he actually got his hands involved in picking up the guns and, the money and that sort of thing, but he knew where to get them, and he knew how to get them from place to place.
Right.
So I think that was his contribution to that sort of thing.
And now there's a lot of talk about running coke, too. When they would bring the guns down, they'd come back up with coke. Frank involved in any kind of coke running?
Frank was, on a personal level, was totally opposed to any kind of illegal drugs. He did have a great knowledge of the drug trade in the Caribbean. And whether that plays into Iran-Contra, I'm not really sure. But he always told me that Fidel had pretty much of a green light for certain people to run stuff through Cuba and collected a lot of money for doing it.
Very interesting. And you hear now, that both Raul and Fidel have a lot of money. There's no doubt about that.
Oh, yeah.
Well, I'm sure they're wise investments, I'm sure. Now, Now, you mentioned, too, that this incident with Duvalier in Haiti, where he had his own B-25 bomber and he's dropping these homemade bombs out the window, had to do something with a mafia-type agreement? What was going on with that?
Well, Frank was a little vague in what he told me about it, but what he said, what my understanding was that there were mafia people involved in the casinos in Haiti.
Right.
And in some capacity, and they felt like they were getting ripped off by Duvalier, and so they wanted to send him a message. And so, the bombs were dropped, and that sent a message, and I think it must have worked. I don't know. I didn't hear the outcome, but that was the reason for that.
Now, did this make the news here in Miami and stuff like that? Bombs were dropped on the Haitian capital.
I don't think so. Not that I know of. I don't know. Not that I know of.
Very interesting. So they could just pull that off, and it never even makes the news.
Well, if it did, it was just a blurb somewhere along the line. I don't know.
Right.
Yeah.
Now, so he did this. He said as a favor to the organized crime, to the American mafia. What about? Do you think since he was a prolific hitman, he was an assassin? Do you think he ever did any hits for the mafia?
No, he was not a made man. He was not. Frank knew the mafia. He worked with the mafia. I'm sure he got paid for what he did in terms of Haiti and WWII. So it wasn't just out of friendship. But no, he was not really a hitman for the mafia, I don't think, no.
Now, what do you think he would have got paid for a job like that? Hey, we need a guy with a B-25 bomber to drop bombs. What could a one-man bomb squad get paid for an operation like that?
Back in the 1960s, I don't know, $5,000, $10,000, something like that.
Really?
Yeah.
I guess you can get a couple of Cadillacs though for about $5,000 back in the 60s, right? But still not much, when you hear what these guys get today.
Well, they didn't get paid much for the missions that they flew in Cuba. I mean, it's a few $1,000s or even less sometimes for the covert flights over Cuba.
But in a lot of ways,
we're paid by
it's a little bit. Wouldn't you think though that if you're doing it for the U.S. government, if you're doing an operation for the CIA, okay, fine, you're going to take a little bit less money because there's less risk. But if you're doing a job for the U.S. mafia, that who's making big money down there at casinos, you'd want a little bit more. Yeah.
Well, maybe he got paid more. I don't know.
He should have had me negotiate these deals.
Yeah. No. Yeah.
Okay. Now another thing, I tell you.
Okay.
Off the air last time, okay, you were telling me about Bobby Riggs. Tell us that story.
Well, as I understand the story, and I just can repeat what this was on a show called Outside the Lines or Inside the Lines, an ESPN sports show, and they were talking about the match between Billie Jean King and Bobby Riggs, and of course she beat him, and that there was a guy that worked in a country club in Tampa who overheard a meeting where my uncle was there, Frank, and Sandra Trafficani. Trafficani was the head of the Tampa mob. He was a mafioso guy. And Riggs apparently had a large gambling debt to Sandra Trafficani. And so the arrangement was made for him to blow the match. Which he did, and he got beat because most of the money, and apparently, I don't know much about rankings in tennis, but apparently he was pretty well ranked, and when you look at it from that standpoint, he probably should have beat her. But anyway, so the story is somehow Frank, I don't know whether Frank's role was to kind of be there to make sure Riggs did what he was supposed to do, or deliver money to him, or what it was, or to wipe out the debt, but that's the story on that. Yeah.
So, do you know if Frank was there in the stands? Perhaps with a scope.
I don't know.
And
I don't know whether he bet on the match either. And I don't know that one either.
But did you ever?
But I do know that he knew Santo Trafficani because he introduced me to him once. So yeah, I know that he knows him.
Oh, really? So you met Trafficante too, then? So then, what is your opinion about the theories that Trafficante was involved in the JFK assassination?
Well. I think the mafia was involved. It could have been Trafficante in particular. The other guy that I always thought was kind of a liaison with Frank and the mafia was a guy named Jaime Levine. Jaime was the slot machine king, and owned all the slot machines practically that were being used in Cuba, and a former partner of Dutch Schultz. And he was a very close friend of Frank's. Frank saw him probably on a weekly basis when Jaime was still alive.
So Frank had more contact with organized crime than he had with the pretty much anybody, don't you think?
He knew them. Yeah, he sure did. I mean, who they were, they knew him. I think the first time he was approached was in the spring of 1959 when Fidel came to the United States looking for help and for aid, and got turned away by Eisenhower. The mafia people came and spoke with Frank when they were in New York and offered him money to do it. And I guess at the time, it wasn't the right time for him to do it or whatever. But they contacted him then, and over the years, that's the reason I think that he's so pivotal in the Kennedy assassination, because he knew he knew the players. He knew the CIA people like E. Howard Hunt and Macho Barker. He knew the mafioso people, and he knew the anti-Castro Cubans in Miami who were all, up in arms about the fact that the Bay of Pigs didn't work out. So, he knew all of those groups, and I think those are the three groups that kind of coalesced into what became the assassination.
And because he also knew Oswald, too, then. So then what is your theory? Was Oswald a double agent? Was he CIA? Was he what?
I think he was a patsy. I don't think he may have fired a gun, but I think he was set up. Which I think is a typical, that and the fact that Jack Ruby comes and kills him. I mean, those are typical, having a patsy and have somebody else, shoot the guy. It's a very typical mob tactic,
Right.
So, I think that's, I think the mob may have instigated it, but I think these other groups helped out.
So you think it was motivated by the mob, but then these other groups helped out? Now, do you think, does Frank
Correct.
know? Did Frank know, what's his name? You just mentioned his name, Ruby. Did Frank know Ruby?
Not that I know of. I don't know the answer to that. I don't know. No, I don't know.
Okay, now that's interesting. So you think the motive was more that the mafia, they were mad about the casinos and stuff like that, and that was the motive for the JFK assassination?
Well, and then the fact that Bobby Kennedy was convening, was his attorney general was going after him,
right,
tooth and nail. And here, they had helped him. They had helped Jack Kennedy win the election. They got a bunch of votes for him, I think, in Chicago, which helped turn the election in his favor. And so now Bobby's then out, aggressively going after him. And, there's some theory that, they took out the president because if they'd just taken out Bobby, the president would have found somebody else to keep going after him. So I don't know. But anyway.
Right, but now, when we discussed this last time a little bit, I mentioned Jim Rothstein, who arrested your uncle, and that's pretty much his theory, too, that it was the mob was behind it, that kind of stuff like that. But you didn't endorse his theory. What do you make of that whole situation? One last time, go ahead.
With what? I'm sorry, I didn't understand.
Yeah, like with Rothstein arrested your uncle, and he said it was a plot, that he was going over to kill Marita Lorenz.
Correct.
And then he confessed to being one of the shooters at the JFK. What do you make of all that? Some people think it was like a publicity stunt, perhaps, or.
Well, I've had my doubts about Rothstein's story. There's no question that he had contact with Frank. Frank was held at Rikers, I think, for about 2 or 3 days after he was arrested. Marita set him up, basically. She actually paid for his plane ticket to come to New York to see her, and then when he showed up in the apartment, she had him arrested, saying that he was coming there to kill her. She also had a book that was coming out, but the fellow over in Portugal, Fernando Simoes, who I think probably did hang out with Frank, especially over in Angola out in the bush when they were fighting against the communists, told me that he asked Frank about whether he played any part in the assassination, and Frank looked at him and smiled and said, yeah, I did. But he wouldn't go into any detail or tell him, what. So, I don't know. I mean, maybe Rothstein's telling the truth. The other thing, I was going to say, spies don't always tell the truth, Ed. I'm sure you know that. And sometimes they tell half-truths. So, I don't know. I mean, maybe I don't know whether Frank would have told Rothstein something like that just to egg him. I don't know. But as far as being one of the shooters, I don't think. I mean, Frank was involved, but he was not one of the shooters. I mean, I'll go back to that. That's my conclusion anyway.
Gotcha. Hey, what about this is kind of bizarre, but the story Doug Caddy tells the story. You know who Doug Caddy is, right?
Yes.
Okay, what do you make of him?
Well, he was a CIA guy. I mean, he and Hunt knew each other through the CIA. That's the reason that Hunt contacted him the night that they got busted.
Right.
And then Caddy arranged for legal representation at the arraignment that Saturday. He was clearly CIA. There's no question about it.
He was also buddies with Guy Bannister before all of this.
Well, the guy in New Orleans, you mean?
Yeah.
Well, that part of I have not looked in too much to Caddy's role in that regard, But, I will tell you this, Frank, during the time I knew him, made a number of trips to New Orleans around this time. So,
But my point was, the caddy told me, he said that the reason was that he was told by Hunt, that E. Howard Hunt, not Jim Hunt, that the reason for the assassination was the alien presence on Earth. What do you make of that?
The reason was what?
To cover up the alien presence on Earth. UFOs. What do you make of that, man?
Well, you know what, Ed? I'll tell you what. I don't know. I don't know about that one.
You don't know about that?
I think I have read that. I saw that online somewhere. There are people. This goes back to Harry Truman and Roswell and Eisenhower, and there are people that think that there's some treaty that we made with the aliens to not tell anybody they're here, and they helped us out with technology that led to computers and things. I don't know.
Frank never mentioned that, though, right?
It sounds a little far out to me.
Yeah, right. Frank never mentioned that, right?
I'm sorry, what? Did
Frank ever mention that?
No, we never talked about aliens. Okay.
Never came up. All right. Let's take a little commercial break here, okay? And we'll get back and we'll talk about because I know you have a legal opinion on Watergate too. How you feel?
Okay.
Okay, great. So we'll be right back with more of Jim Hunt. I got to tell you, Jim, one of my favorite guests. Straight shooter. Jim Hunt's a straight shooter. I like this. And he wrote he wrote the book Warrior. Frank Sturgis, the CIA's #1 assassin spy who nearly killed Castro but was ambushed by Watergate. The book is in the Opperman Report bookstore. You can also find it up on Amazon. And if you need an alibi, get a hold of Jim Hunt. I think he's a very handy guy.
I'll give you an affidavit.
There you go, man. Okay, we'll be right back after these messages with more of Jim Hunt.
Thanks, Ed.
Thank you, man. And now a word from our sponsors. Did you know that 30% of all people on online dating websites and personal ads are either married or in a monogamous relationship? 30%. If you suspect that your husband, your wife, your boyfriend, your girlfriend may be cheating online, go to emailrevealer.com. Our online infidelity investigation. You give us their email address, and we could trace it back to online personal ads, dating sites, and social networks. We can even expand the investigation and find them cheating on escort service sites or even porn sites if they're registered to porn sites and swinger sites. So check out emailrevealer.com if you suspect your spouse is cheating, and check out our online infidelity investigation. William Ramsey is a producer here at the Opperman Report, and he's just come out with a new book, Children of the Beast, Aleister Crowley's Shadow Over Humanity. Now, he just sent me a copy of this book. Oh, boy, it's about 2 inches thick, and there's a chapter on just about everybody in this book that you can imagine. The Beatles, and Jack Parsons, everybody's in here. It's incredible. And I definitely recommend this book. There's a bunch of pictures in here, too, of all these people and different chapters and information. Anton LaVey and people I've never heard of, too. There's a whole bunch in here. JFC Fuller. I don't know who he is. But it's great stuff by our producer here, William Ramsey. So check out Children of the Beast, Aleister Crowley's Shadow Over Humanity. You can find it on Amazon.com, or you could find it in the Opperman Report .com bookstore. We have an urgent bulletin. It seems that the group Strawman is still on the loose. It has been confirmed that Strawman are Canadian, okay, and that authorities are asking people to stay indoors, lock your doors and windows until this group can be dealt with. You could find more information about this group of Canadians, at strawmanmusic.com. you can have your ad played here. Okay, we're looking for sponsors. Okay, in fact, we desperately need sponsors right now to take this show to the next level. So you can have your ad played here, read live, like I'm doing now, so artfully. Or we can even work up a little jingle for you with some music and stuff like that and play it here. You have no idea how inexpensive it would be to have your ad played on the Opperman Report on 7 stations live Friday night and another 7 stations live on Saturday night, plus replayed every day of the week on different stations, and then archived on YouTube, Spreaker, iHeartRadio, iTunes, and all different kinds of podcasts, Pod This and Podbean, all different kinds of places who archive the show for us. And on those archives, your ad would play indefinitely, forever. You also get a little banner on OppermanReport.com. You get a mention on the air, you get a little interview on the air, and all kinds of fun stuff if you sponsor Opperman Report. We have an opportunity to get this show on a major AM/FM station in California. We've been approved. So if you want to sponsor us into that, so incredibly inexpensive that your ad would be heard by the range covers 5 million people in population where your ad would be broadcast, and all these other stations would be thrown in for free. So really affordable prices to sponsor OppermanReport.com. Get a copy of my book, How to Become a Successful Private Investigator. You can get a copy of that book at emailrevealer.com, or you can get a copy of that book now. It's back up on Amazon.com. How to Become a Successful Private Investigator by Ed Opperman. And this book has been updated a little bit from the previous book that we had that was available to our wonderful listeners. Okay, welcome back to the Opperman Report. We're here with Jim Hunt, who is the nephew of Frank Sturgis. Fascinating information coming out of here. He's the author of the book. Give me 1 second here. Author of the book Warrior, Frank Sturgis, the CIA's #1 assassin spy who nearly killed Castro but was ambushed by Watergate. So now, Jim, you think you could have got the Watergate burglars a not guilty verdict if they went to trial?
Yeah, that's my belief, Ed, and it's a little. Let me try to explain it. What happened was in January of 1973, Frank and the burglars all pled guilty. They followed E. Howard Hunt's lead, and on January the 15th, they entered guilty pleas to 7 felony counts. And they were set for, and they fired their lawyer, a guy named Henry Rothblatt, so they didn't have a lawyer. Actually, Sirica, the judge, appointed a friend of his to represent them. He met with them over the weekend, and they came in on Monday, and they entered the plea, but anyway, which I thought was a little ridiculous. But so they have a guilty plea. They're set for sentencing in March of that year, and they went out and they found another attorney, a guy named Daniel Schultz. Schultz had actually worked as a U.S. attorney, and the recommendation to hire Schultz actually came from Earl Silber, who was the prosecutor, because Macho Barker's daughter called and asked him for a recommendation. So anyway, Schultz comes on the case, and he starts meeting with him, and he hears about the CIA thing, and basically he comes to believe their story when they tell him they thought they were working for the CIA or an agency like the CIA, and that they were doing work basically for the president. And, it was, what they did was illegal, but within the world of spies and their world, it wasn't an illegal thing to break in somewhere. I mean, presidents before Nixon had authorized that type of thing. So they thought they were working for, E. Howard Hunt's office was in the White House. He worked right out of the White House. So they thought they were doing a legitimate spy job. Let's put it that way. And the other people that came around to that conclusion were the people for the U.S. Probation Department, who did a number of studies of the burglars for Judge Sirica, and also came to the conclusion that they all believed, in good faith, that they were working for a legitimate, operation. So Schultz wanted to, he filed a motion to withdraw the guilty pleas because he wanted to go to trial and raise that defense. Well, unfortunately, Judge Sirica wouldn't let him withdraw the guilty pleas, and so they remained guilty. But here's the reason for my belief. There's another part of Watergate that you don't hear too much about. Daniel Ellsberg, if you'll recall, was the guy who released the Pentagon Papers, and Nixon was out to get him, and really the first plumbers or Watergate job that occurred was in September of 1971 when Macho Barker and Eugenio Martinez broke into the office of Dr. Fielding, who was Ellsberg's psychiatrist. They were trying to find some dirt on Ellsberg. They were later prosecuted for that and went to trial. And at trial, Schultz asked the judge to give an instruction on this. It's good faith reliance on apparent authority is what it's called. I mean, for instance, if you see some guy in a police officer's uniform trying to apprehend somebody, and he asks you to help him apprehend him, and you do it, and it turns out later he was just trying to kidnap the person, are you going to be prosecuted? No. I mean, you thought the guy was a legitimate cop. You thought you were doing your citizen's duty. So that's basically what good faith reliance on apparent authority is. Well, so Schultz lost the case, the Fielding case, and took it up to the Court of Appeals, and the Court of Appeals said, no, wait a minute, that instruction should have been given. The jury should have been allowed to consider whether there was a good faith reliance on apparent authority, and remanded the case back. Well, the U.S. attorney decided not to prosecute it any further because they knew they were going to lose if they did because of the good faith defense. So I think if Judge Sirica had been more attentive to the constitutional rights of the burglars like Frank, and instead of just trying to get to the bottom of Watergate and publicize things for himself, he would have let him have a trial on it. And I think at a trial, I think there's a very good chance that would have been found not guilty.
Well, then let me ask you this, because you use this example of a bystander who's told by the police, hey, help me capture this, apprehend the suspect. But in this case, right, these guys were professionals. These guys were professional black bag job guys, and so they would know that, hey, there has to be a warrant. There has to be a search warrant. There has to be a court order for me to be able to do this. They're a little bit more savvy than the average guy in the street, no?
Yeah, I'll give you that one, Ed. But at the same time, you have to look at it from the standpoint of their world, okay? And so when I say good faith reliance on apparent authority, they're looking at the President of the United States and his minions having the authority to have them break in someplace, okay? And, I guess what I'm saying, I think, they could rely on that authority. In other words, it was something, it was not a legal thing to do, but in their world, it wasn't illegal. Let me put it that way.
No, so because these same guys had done a similar black bag job with, and then also too, if they had done a similar job with Ellsberg and they got caught on that and convicted, then don't you think they should have had knowledge that this wasn't kosher?
Well, wait a minute now. They were Barker and Martinez were convicted of the Ellsberg Fielding break-in. But then that conviction was later overturned on appeal.
Gotcha.
Because the Court of Appeals said they should have let the jury consider this case from the standpoint of good faith reliance on apparent authority, and that instruction should have been given. And as I say, when the case was sent back, the U.S. attorney decided not to prosecute it anymore because I think they figured they had a loser on that issue.
Very interesting. Now, you mentioned though that they had fired their attorney, and then they were and then they made this plea deal, and then they were out on it. Why'd they fire that attorney? Well,
there's a couple of stories on that. Rothblatt said that he was fired because he did not want them to plead guilty. He wanted to go to trial. He also said he was doing the case for free because of the publicity. Now, according to Schultz, when he took over, what really happened was they had paid Rothblatt a retainer, and he wanted to have access to it without their permission. In other words, they put up $25,000, $50,000, whatever it was, that he could go in and draw against it anytime he wanted to, and they wouldn't do it.
That sounds.
So I think there was both a fee dispute and that may have been at the bottom of it.
Yeah, that sounds more like it. That has a ring of truth, don't you think?
Yeah, I do too. Yeah, I do. I'm a lawyer, Dad. Come on.
I know. Yeah, I'm an investigator. I know. You know, everybody wants to help, man. But where's the money? Okay, now, what do you make of this whole situation with Dorothy Hunt, the death of Dorothy Hunt? That had to play a role in all this, in their motivations, then.
It certainly did for her husband. I mean, you talked to him. I know you talked to St. John. I mean, I think that fact in particular, you know, you talk about sinister stuff. I mean, I'll tell you what. I mean, if the Nixon people were behind all of that in an effort to keep her quiet and to scare the rest of them, boy, what kind of government do we have, Ed? I'll tell you what. But I think, you know, I have not read St. John's book, but he has a book about his mother. I don't know if he's talked to him about it, but I think there's good evidence that there was, you know, some shenanigans going on with that plane crash and her death. Absolutely.
Oh, yeah, especially when you look immediately afterward that the Nixon's appointing a new head of the FAA. You know, it's...
Right.
You know.
And the FBI is on the scene before anybody else.
Right.
You know?
Right. Yeah, right. Yeah, when you look at that, so, did Frank ever talk about that?
No, I didn't. That's one thing I never really talked. Well, the one thing he did tell me was that, you know, they found this money in the wreckage, and there was something on one of the bills, somebody had written "Good luck, FS," you know, and people thought that was Frank putting his, you know, mark on their money or something, and he said no, he never did that.
Oh, so some people think that Frank was involved in expediting that payoff?
Only to the no. Well, that Frank somehow had come into contact with the money because he had written "Good luck, FS." You know, but it was, I don't know why that was written there. I have no idea, but it wasn't Frank. I mean, Frank didn't see that money. I mean, the only money he ever saw through Watergate was a little bit of money at the beginning that he got from Macho Barker.
How much money was that?
$5,000.
$5,000 changed history. For
well,
$5,000.
You know, I'm sorry.
Yeah, I'm saying the history changed over $5,000. You know.
Well, you know, that was certainly a lot less than Macho and the rest of them ever got. I'll tell you that. I mean, Hunt and Liddy both got six-figure payoffs from the committee to reelect the president. I know that. And I mean, that was the whole thing. Hunt was threatening to blackmail Creep and was demanding the money and so forth. And then, boom, poor Dorothy dies in a plane crash and the money burns up. You know, I'll tell you what, you know, if that's the kind of government we have, Jesus Christ, God save us, you know?
Well, do you think anything's changed, you know, at all?
From those days?
Yeah.
No, I think the CIA is still in business to be in business for itself. You know, its main job is to perpetuate itself. It has there are absolutely no moral scruples whatsoever that apply to the CIA. They can say, I mean, you know, when all this stuff broke about Frank and his involvement with the CIA, they denied it up and down. You know, that they all know we don't know who he is. Well, you know, Dan Schultz went into to Langley when he was representing them and had access to a lot of the classified stuff that on Cuba, and Frank was all over it. I mean, there was no question that Frank had done contract work for him. And Gonzalez is the locksmith too, both of them. But you know, they publicly say no, we don't know who they are. Give me a break.
Well, then let me ask you this: what do you think now when you see Trump's campaign and you see guys like Manafort and Stone, Roger Stone, and Pat Buchanan, all there? You know, what do you make of that?
You mean on Trump's side?
Yeah.
Well, where else would they be? You know? I mean, they're not going to support what's her name. You know, God, don't get me talking about this election. I'm sorry. Go ahead. I'll answer any question you want.
I know you will. But like, you know, it seems like Trump's back in with the old Nixon crowd.
Trump is what?
Is back in with the old Nixon crowd. He's got Roger Stone. He's got Manafort. And
well, you know, you bring up an interesting point because, you know, we didn't really talk about what caused Watergate or what it was, but, you know, there was a struggle between Nixon in the CIA because he was trying to get his hands on some secret files there. One of the files was called the Bay of Pigs file, but it really had to do with the assassination of JFK.
Right.
And Frank was a firm believer that there was a thing called the club. And basically it's an extra, outside the lines group of people who really run things. And, when you think back to President Eisenhower and the military-industrial complex, that's really what I think Frank is talking about. So to be honest with you, Ed, I'm sitting here thinking, if that club is out there, where does Trump fit in? Or does he? You know what I mean? I don't know. One of the reasons for the disagreement between Nixon and the club was supposedly that when Spiro Agnew was resigned as vice president, the club wanted them to appoint Nelson Rockefeller.
All right.
And Nixon said, screw you, and he appoints Gerald Ford. Well, then what happens after Nixon resigns? Ford becomes president. Who became vice president? Nelson Rockefeller. Okay? I mean, so I think that group's still out there. But to be honest with you, I don't know how Trump, I don't know. I mean, I don't know whether I can't see him being a part of it necessarily, but I don't know.
Yeah, he seems to be sort of a monkey wrench, but then again, who the hell knows, Because
I know
there's all stuff too. There's a lot of stuff with Trump.
I think Hillary would be closer to the club than Trump, to be honest with you.
Absolutely. Yeah, but Trump has CIA ties too. There's a lot of stuff out there. David K. Johnson's done a lot of work. Trump partners with all kinds of CIA connections. All kinds of shenanigans going on. And,
really?
Oh yeah.
Wow.
Look up David K. Johnson. A lot of good work there, man. With one of Trump's guys in there. Being involved with a CIA operative, a couple of them, as a matter of fact. Okay, we're down to the last couple of minutes. What else have I forgotten to ask you that you think is really important to get out in this last 5 minutes? What other secrets can you reveal to us, Mr. Hunt?
Frank made a heck of a marinara sauce. He was a great cook.
I bet he did.
Really was.
I bet he did. I bet he did.
No, he did.
Like a lot of cool. Did he go out a lot of cool restaurants all the time, stuff like that, out in nightclubs and stuff?
Yeah. He would take me over to, we would go over to places in Miami Beach, or his favorite Italian restaurant was a place called Mary's. It was in Miami. But in Miami Beach, we would go over to Sonny's, which was a kind of Italian restaurant pizza place that they had a singing waiter, a guy who sang like, what's his name, Pavarotti. That's where I met with Sandro Trovacani and a guy named Stanley Nanarini, who was head of the Pittsburgh mob. They were there that night. We went over. So, he enjoyed food. Absolutely. I think he actually did some cooking for Fidel when they were up in the hills. So.
Really? Just incredible stuff, Jim. I tell you, I can't thank you enough. So here we had Jim Hunt. The book is Warrior, Frank Sturgis, the CIA's #1 assassin spy who nearly killed Castro but was ambushed by Watergate. And for all the people that complain that I didn't ask them about I think we got a lot more than you guys wanted. Okay? So Jim Hunt, man, thank you so much. Okay, brother? Anything you have to come up you want to promote, I'll put you right on air.
I appreciate it, Ed, and thank you again. It's always very interesting talk. I learn stuff when I talk to you, so I thank you.
Everyone, all right? I appreciate it, brother. Thank you very much.
All right, thanks. Bye.
Bye. Jim Hunt, okay, guys, you might say straight from the horse's mouth, from the alibi's mouth, straight from the mouth of the alibi. Jim Hunt, Warrior, Frank Sturgis, the CIA's #1 assassin spy who nearly killed Castro but was ambushed by Watergate. Great stuff from a guy that was there on the inside. Helped making napalm bombs to be dropped on the Haiti consulate. You gotta love the kind of people you get to talk to on the show. If you like the show, if you enjoyed this show, if you think you got some information that's not out there before, I don't think anybody's ever heard this information about Ollie North being involved in the assassination of the Prime Minister of Portugal, and also was the defense minister too down there was assassinated. I don't think you've heard that before. Even guys who are into this and they study it all the time, I don't think you've heard these stories before about Frank Sturgis having his own B-25 bomber. I think that's important information. You can support this show by going to OppermanReport.com and becoming a member of the member section. See, this show could have went in the member section. Maybe you never would have heard this information. But we give it to you for free on Friday nights. But there's more in the member section. You go there, you become a member. You sign up, you subscribe. It helps to support the show. It helps keep this show on the air. I think we're doing important work here. You can also send donations. You go to PayPal, right? OppermanReport@gmail.com, okay, on PayPal. Or you can go to OppermanReport.com and you can make a donation there, and that goes straight to the checking account. Thank you guys so much. Good night.